We've all had experiences with like absolutely dog shit drivers on the road on the ground. Can you imagine your average like annoying driver on the road but in the sky? Good lord, that is such a nightmarish scenario. Let's just do an Atom Something double feature. Why not? Flying cars will never be a thing. Here's why by Atom Something. Now, the idea for why flying cars are interesting is, I think, pretty readily apparent. Normally, when flying cars are referenced, it's like, oh, I'm stuck in traffic right now. Wouldn't it be cool if I could just lift off and fly over it? But it's not really the best idea, as far as I'm aware. I haven't watched this video yet, so obviously it's going to get into why. I don't know. It seems like a really cool idea when you think about it. Like, it is the future that people expect. But, like, it's already incredibly difficult, costly, and a lot of labor to get your pilot's license. Even to, like, fly, like, an individual personal plane with, like, room for, like, 2 or 3 people total. And you gotta wonder why. Oh, perhaps it could be because the penalty for fucking around, the finding out portion of that, when you're in a regular car on the ground, pretty grisly. If you crash, you could hurt yourself. You could hurt another person you crash into. You could damage property or whatever. Not very good. That's on the ground. Now imagine we extend that into flight. Imagine losing control of your flying car. What are you gonna do? You're more than likely just gonna crash into the ground. And at that point, the standard crash would be much worse. Not only do you crash up top, but then you fall and crash into the ground. That's gonna be even worse. Not only that, like even minor fender benders might cause you to lose control. Like the technology would have to be insane to be able to stabilize someone in the air. And not only that, but like air traffic already is like insane. If you've ever looked at like an air traffic control map for planes, it's way too dank. There's way too much going on there. So imagine that, but even more. Like there's already a lot of planes always in transit. Now imagine each individual person has their own plane. That would be a lot of sauce. I don't think that's a really good idea. There are an average of 10K commercial flights in the sky at any given moment. Yeah, absurd. Now, that's not to say that everybody would be having a flying car. That would certainly be a very expensive endeavor. It doesn't seem like a good play, but let's find out more.
Look, listen. I hate to say this, but flying cars will never be a thing. I know. They are so epic. They are 420 Thanos, Keanu Reeves, Marvel, epic science machines, and they might even turn you into a pickle.
Very soy.
However, in real life, flying cars would either be A, completely impractical, B, hazardous, C, detrimental to your mental health. The entire concept is just non-viable. And when I say non-viable, I don't mean we will not see any flying cars, period. I do think they'll have some kind of niche application, but nothing beyond that. Flying cars, by and large, are just a stupid concept. And if they were just that, I wouldn't really bother. You know, there's plenty of stupid ideas out there and they usually die on their own. However, I also think that flying cars present a unique and exotic danger, multiple dangers in fact, and that's the reason why this video exists. So how and why are flying cars such a bad idea?
Imagine somebody loses control of their personal flying car and they end up in your living room. Fuck that.
At the first point, practicality. So the reason why we came up with this thing called transportation is to get to places quicker. So we can divide traveling into 3 relevant categories. Short range between 0 and 50 kilometers, mid range between 50 and 500 kilometers, and long range which is above 500 kilometers. Alright, so I believe that here we can already see the first problem. Namely that flying cars just don't make a lot of sense for short or long ranges. If your destination is within a short range, you can just walk, cycle, take public transit, or you can just drive if those aren't an option. And if you're going long range, well then you can just take a train or an airplane, or just drive even, because flying cars just aren't that fast. Their top speeds are generally 160 to 200 kilometers per hour, which is a bit more than highway speed essentially, and is very much inferior to high-speed rail and vastly inferior to airplanes. So the practical use of flying cars is basically limited to mid-range only. Also, you have to make sure that you can land at or near the destination. Also, you can't really use a flying car if the weather is too bad. If there's a giant rainstorm or snowstorm or the winds are too high. Also.
Especially considering that most planes are going to be larger than your average automobile, right? And if we think about flying cars, they're going to be roughly, we're going to try to keep them anyway, roughly around the standard size of like a sedan, right? But obviously with a little bit extra to make it so that they can fly. And because of that, because of the lack of weight, I would imagine you would be subject to even worse conditions in bad weather. So like when there are big jumbo jets in the air and there's like a bad weather event happening and the plane gets stuck in it, it's a big vehicle, so they can kind of make it through with a little bit of turbulence. You usually are fine, but with a tiny little aluminum can kind of car like this, you're just flying away, depending on how bad the winds are, etc. So a lot of the times you just wouldn't be able to use it.
If you're going at night, you have to make absolutely sure that your destination has an illuminated landing area. And the thing about flying cars is that they are essentially just foldable sports planes. As such, their structure is very light and so very vulnerable. So if you go to a store in, say, land mode and someone backs into you in the parking lot and, say, dents one of your flaps, then you can't really fly until it gets replaced.
True.
So every time you use your flying car in land mode, you are one slight bump away from weeks of no flying and hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars of service fees. Alright, so things aren't looking great for the flying car so far. You can only really use it at a certain range, in good weather, during daylight. The destination has to have landing infrastructure, and even with the slightest damage you immediately have to go to the repair shop. Alright, so let's move on to the second aspect of flying cars, namely the hazard they pose.
Let's go.
So flying cars are essentially half-a-ton projectiles flying around at moderate speeds. And in the case of mass adoption, there would also be a greater number of accidents. You know, Billy Bob discovers a dent on the right flap in the Walmart parking lot and thinks to himself, yeah, this is probably fine. And then it turns out mid-flight that it's not really fine. Because of issues like this, flying cars would basically need to be banned above all human settlements, and basically all other strategically important infrastructure. For example, military installations, airports, seaports, high-voltage cables. And then there's also the environmental considerations, meaning that flying cars...
You can make this argument for normal cars too. Yeah, but you can't put the cat back in the bag for that one, you know? Ideally, we would reclaim our streets from cars. But that's already a hard enough, you know, task. Can't really put the genie back in the bottle. If we were having this conversation when the automobiles first came around, and that conversation was had, they just lost to capital, essentially, then that would be one thing. But unfortunately, it's a bit late.
Cars would need to be banned above nature reserves, migratory bird routes, and any other areas where they might end up damaging or disturbing the local wildlife. So in order to really mitigate the hazard...
Oh, so yeah, exactly, Annie. Tangentially to what you're saying. We've all had experiences with like absolutely dog shit drivers on the road on the ground. Can you imagine your average like annoying driver on the road but in the sky? Good lord, that is such a nightmarish scenario. Imagine road rage but in the air. Imagine some unstable motherfucker brake checking you in the sky. You're out of your mind.
Posed by flying cars, you would need to organize things. Consider this map of Budapest and its surrounding areas. So
is that how you pronounce that? Budapest? Not Budapest? They probably make it Budapest, so it doesn't sound like you're saying pest, like a, you know, an insect. That's probably why it's pronounced that way. There's no other reason why it would be pronounced any other way.
Our no-fly zone turns out pretty much everywhere. So the only real solution here is to essentially establish corridors, you know, places where you can concentrate flying cars and focus on minimizing their negative consequences. And in order to avoid chaos on the roads, like flying cars randomly taking off and landing, you would need to establish a whole bunch of huge airstrips where potentially hundreds of flying cars can take off or land at the same time. And all this...
Wouldn't that be worse? So like already cars have caused infrastructure to be garbage, where because of everybody having a car, you need to provide roads and storage for those vehicles, which decreases the amount of space that you have given, you know, the amount of space you're working with. You know, massive highways and stuff like this, like parking garages and massive parking lots, all this kind of stuff. Car-centric infrastructure is booty butt cheeks, and not in a good way. So like if you're having to make landing strips and takeoff strips and infrastructure like that in a bunch of different places, of course it'll be out of the way, away from like population centers, because it has to be. But like it would still be taking up a lot of space that could probably be better used for other things.
This would need to be coordinated, of course, somehow. So once again, we are talking about the mass adoption scenario. And wow, what a great idea.
And yeah, can you imagine having to enforce people to not go into the bad red zones, the no flying car zones? You'd have to have flying cops in order to do that, or some other enforcement agency or mechanism. Because like drivers on the ground are already dumb as hell. So like in the sky, having to like know where you can't fly, where the markings for that would be very difficult to have. Like you would need like big towers with lights on them to be like, don't go here, you're not allowed to go here. Or I guess maybe an automated system through GPS or whatever in the car that like tells you you're gonna enter, you know, a no-go zone soon or whatever. But like otherwise, it's gonna be really difficult to keep people from flying where they're not supposed to. Especially Americans who, you know, god damn it, I'm a goddamn red-blooded American. I pay my goddamn taxes, even though I don't think taxes should exist. I should be able to go wherever I want, wherever I please, and travel however I goddamn feel like it, brother. That kind of an attitude, but you can fly now, and you're not limited to staying on roads. Absurd. Absurd.
these focused, busy transit corridors with some major transit hubs along the way where people can get on and off. If only Hungary had something like this, it would be such a great help, something which can move a lot of people economically, which is absolutely perfect for middle distances, something which
sounds like communism to me, brother.
Runs along these corridors and ends in these big transit hubs, so to speak. And someone should really call Elon Musk about this, because this shit needs inventing right now. I mean, this would revolutionize our transit. Yeah, so anyway, the third and last aspect of flying cars that I want to touch on is your mental health.
This is the interesting one. This one, I don't really know where he's going with it. If I had to guess, I would imagine it would be much more stressful to fly a flying car. There are already people that suffer a lot of anxiety being behind the wheel. And if you're in that position where like being in a car makes you really gives you a lot of anxiety, makes you very scared on the road, you probably shouldn't be driving. Because when you're driving, you want to be as predictable as possible so that everybody understands roughly what's going on. It decreases the variables if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Whereas like if you're anxious on the road, if you're scared, you might do weird things that make that predictability harder, which leads to more variables for problems to happen. Being in a flying vehicle, I would imagine there'd be a lot of stress involved with that process. Because like the penalty for, losing control of your car is like you might crash into like the side of like an embankment or something. You could get hurt. You might crash into another person. You could get hurt or die. Everybody understands this. The penalty for crashing your flying car, more often than not, is probably just going to be death unless you eject from the car with a parachute or whatever, which doesn't seem very fun either. So like, that's the primary thing I can think of when it comes to mental health. Oh, and not to mention people on the ground and the amount of anxiety you might have that some dumbass, some conure motherfucker loses control of his vehicle and like accidentally flies it into your living room when you're trying to watch The Sopranos or whatever. Like constantly having to worry about that. Jesus Christ. I don't know what else it would be though, so I guess we'll find out.
Even if flying cars would be flying around settlements, a lot of noise. And this would be true even if a flying car would be only as loud as a regular car. Flying cars travel at an altitude of around 2-3 kilometers generally. For comparison, airliners travel at around 10 kilometers. Now, our current land-based highways are already super loud, but we can soundproof them. With air corridors, this is obviously not possible. So you would be looking at a constant background buzzing, even outside cities, or I should say especially outside cities, the places which should be actually quieter. And this of course would have a devastating effect on everybody's mental health. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, the maddening buzzing will always be in your ear. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, this would be a version of hell. And the thing is, the more people adopt flying cars, the more severe these problems get. But then again, I don't think they'll be adopted en masse because of the aforementioned problems. They're just too severe. And all this renders the concept of flying cars effectively useless. It's just another form of inefficient individual transport which we should be phasing out at this point. Alright, so this was my take on flying cars. And I haven't even mentioned things like terrorism, stuff like loading your flying car with fertilizer or something and then kamikazing into a building.
Oh, or, true! That is actually really true. Terroristic acts have used vehicles as weapons a lot. Like, you think back to, there are a couple, like, prominent examples. Charlottesville is one of them. The dude who drove his car into a large crowd. People have been using vehicles as weapons for acts of terror. And, like, imagine, like, having a personal plane to use to do that. Holy fuck. Not very good.
Load up a bunch of Molotovs and use it as a bomber. Even without these, the case against flying cars is strong enough, I think. So anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And do check out my Patreon if you think this content is worth your money.
True.
And I'll be seeing you next time.
It's a good video. Flying cars are cringe. I agree. This video is Conure Callout as Altera Terra. Thanks for the support. Hope you continue to enjoy the videos. If you'd like to be the next Conure Callout, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter @ConureCC. Retweet my video links when they go live. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put all notifications on when you hit that bell. Leave a like if you like, comment down below if you think I'm wrong or whatever, and have a fine evening. Unless, of course, it's not evening where you are, in which case I hope the upcoming evening are fine as well. Okay, bye.